for the majority of my career, it's just like anybody who will have you is like the genre that you're in. It's not like, I would love to do this. It's like, you'll give me a job? Thank God.
First I got your voicemail, then I got you. We can meet in person or maybe on Zoom. So tell me what's your genre, tell me what do you do. I'd like to know the things that specifically make you.
Hello, I'm Tim Barnes. You are the genre. And in every episode of this show, I ask someone about the first genres that inspired them, the first crafts that they pursued, and how they feel about those first pursuits now. I do that because these are 3 questions that get a great conversation started. And I also feel like those questions are entryways towards discovering what your genre has been all along. This episode, I'm talking to humor, TV, and book writer Evan Waite. He's got this great book out called Life Wants You Dead, a calm, rational, and totally legit guide to scaring yourself safe. And having read it, I think it's an example of the finest humor writing, and it's also highly inventive. Evan somehow captured what it's like to mindlessly wander endless tabs on the internet in the form of pages in a book. But before we get into that interview, I want to remind you that there are a few ways that you can support this podcast. You can like and subscribe to it wherever you're listening to it. Leave it a nice comment. These are things that help the show gain traction. It's kind of annoying, but it's just the way that things work. There's also a newsletter component to the show, so you can find a link to it in the show notes or at youarethegenre.com. Free subscriptions to that newsletter give you updates on new shows in your inbox, plus some of the other things I do like daily jokes. But if you upgrade to a paid subscription, you get advanced episodes plus other goodies. It's just a way of saying, hey, I really like what you're doing. So, Evan Waite, he is a co-executive producer of Family Guy and wrote on the Emmy-winning Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt and other shows like NBC's Sunnyside, Netflix's Inside Job, and Comedy Central's The President Show. And in this conversation, I find out how he went from being a teacher to a contributor to The Onion to all the incredible things he's doing now, including writing this book, Life Wants You Dead. So please enjoy this conversation with Evan Waite. So yeah, what was the process of coming up with a book with a name like this, Life Wants You Dead? It seems like a very paranoid person would write this. Are you actually a pretty paranoid person?
Well, I mean, the pandemic definitely taught me a few things about myself that I didn't know. I always thought I was pretty relaxed and chill and everything. And then once the pandemic started, my relationship with fear just like completely changed really quickly. And all of a sudden I did feel like some shades of that paranoia that I never felt before. So, and then when I just started looking around, I started noticing that like everybody's relationship with fear was changing, like in the span of just like even just a few weeks. And it just seemed like a societal shift that seemed interesting. And I was like, okay, maybe there's something here.
And was it beneficial to explore it through humor?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it sort of takes some of the power out of it. You start to see how ridiculous you're being when you see it on the page. You're just like, okay, like maybe I can regulate myself a little better now that I'm like getting a sense of where it's at.
The section, once I got to the page about skeletons, that's when I really locked in, because it reminds me a bit of one of my favorite short stories, which is a short story by Ray Bradbury. It might be called The Skeleton, where someone's skeleton is trying to kill them. And it makes you think so much about the fact that there is this mechanism inside of your body that we kind of forget about until a part of it breaks.
I mean, you assume that it's on your side just because it's inside you, but like, you don't know that.
And you've had quite the interesting path to lead up to a book like this. What I love about it is that it is very cartoony in a way. It's like there's so many little bits in there. It kind of feels like you figured out how to put the internet experience on the page.
Yeah. I mean, it really is one of these things where, like, I've worked in a lot of different sort of comedy spaces, and like every time you're at one of them, you kind of like bring new skills and new understanding of comedy and like just a new way of doing things. And my thought with this was to try to pour all of that into one book. So it could be like, because of the structure of it being this paranoid and unreliable narrator, you can just make complete swerves. It's just like this person in the world of the book is completely unhinged, so it can go anywhere you want.
Yeah,
it just lended itself to like a grab bag of different types of stuff. So
I love that because that kind of ties into the theme of this podcast, which is about how you've reached the point of becoming your own genre by melding all of the multiple things that you do and following the things that genuinely inspire you. You've written for a lot of different kinds of TV shows, as you just mentioned, like Kimmy Schmidt, a streaming comedy show, all the way up to currently Family Guy, a traditional comes on. What do you call that now? Regular TV,
Just a network animated show. Yeah.
network animated show.
It's
Yeah,
also antiquated when you hear
yeah.
it.
But has animation always been a part of the things that you wanted to start doing in your career, or did you kind of fall into that?
I mean, I did sort of fall into it. It's one of these things where, for the majority of my career, it's just like anybody who will have you is like the genre that you're in. You know, it's not like,
Yeah.
I would love to do this. It's like, you'll give me a job? Thank God.
Were you doing a lot of live performing before you started writing?
No, none. I mean,
Okay.
I really have no background in that at all, and I really don't want to either.
Yeah. Well, I started off doing stand up and bridging into writing for television and kind of in the process realizing, oh, yeah, that was kind of all that I wanted to do the whole time. I used to want to be a filmmaker. And a part of that was always like, I always had a difficulty with stage presence in a way. I was the type of stand up that you watch and say, that's a good writer, not necessarily a good performer.
That's all right. I mean, I could see it's a good vehicle to get your material out. I mean, I respect people that are willing and able to do that. But yeah, I just start pouring sweat. Like, it's just like I look guilty.
I'm always fascinated, though, by the path of the people who are just like, I'm just a writer and I specifically want to write for television. How did you start off in that?
I mean, my path was a very unusual one, I have to say. I really started, I used to be a teacher. I was an ESL teacher for about 6 or 7 years. And I was living in China at the time because I was working at an international school. And there was a period where I was like, I could keep doing this for the rest of my life if I wanted to. It's a great job. You make good money and you get to travel all the time. But I sort of had this other itch to do comedy writing. And so I really zeroed in on The Onion. I was like, I decided, okay, I'm going to like try to get into The Onion and see if that's a possibility. Like, because I didn't know anything about writing a script or anything, but I thought, okay, I sort of understand like the language of The Onion and how like a headline works, I think. So I started, well, for my job, I had to quit. I had to tell them I was leaving in December. The school year doesn't end until June.
So wait, you quit and said, and when they said why, you said, because I want to write for The Onion?
I mean, I didn't say it to everybody.
But that feels like a intense moment in your life, you know? That's not an easy thing to say.
And the people that I did say it to, I could see the sadness in their eyes. And it was just like, dude, what are you talking about? And I felt it too. It wasn't like, oh, they're crazy. It's like, maybe I'm crazy. I don't know. So, it gave me a lot of time to think about it and how I was going to do it. I mean, it was definitely like a strategic element to it. It wasn't just sort of random. I kind of thought about, okay, what's the best way to approach this? And I thought, like, you don't want to like send an email to the editor-in-chief and be like, hey, I'm some guy and I want to write The Onion, because you figure he probably gets like 3 of those a day. So the sort of strategy was like, okay, let's go talk to, like, on Facebook, reach out to people who used to be at The Onion but aren't there anymore, because I felt like, okay, these are people that can be candid and tell me the truth about how it works without having to like represent the company.
Got it. Yeah.
And then like gradually you start to try to get a little closer to the people that are like in the action. And then when they see your page, they see that you're friends with people that they know. And it's like, it sort of unconsciously like validates he's in the mix at least a little bit.
Yeah. What was the first comedy piece of writing that you were excited about and that you felt like, this is my first stamp, my first entry into the world of professional comedy writing?
I don't know if it was the first joke I got into The Onion, but it was a joke about the Calvin and Hobbes creator who famously kind of became reclusive and sort of disappeared.
Yeah.
And it was this idea that every day he's still writing a Calvin and Hobbes strip and then he just destroys it after, so you don't get the chance to see it. I was like, oh, they actually like let you write stuff like that, and it's fine. So every time it just opens it up to the thought that you can do lots of different kind of stuff there as long as you can fit it in that sort of packaging.
What was the first genre that inspired you as a child?
Well, I mean, ironically, I think Calvin and Hobbes is really like, that would be my first thing that I really locked into. I was like, this is like the best thing I've ever seen. I remember my grandfather, he had a copy of one of the treasuries, and he just sort of gave it to me, and I didn't really know what it was, and I just got like obsessed with it right away. it's like it's so childlike, but it's also super smart and interesting. And the pictures are like fun to look at. Like every element of it is like firing on all cylinders.
Do you identify with Calvin or Hobbes?
Well, I mean, I did sort of grow up in like a rural situation, so I sort of like lived in the woods.
Uh,
And so there's a lot of that stuff in the comic where they're just kind of traipsing through the woods. And, that was sort of like what I was doing too. So I definitely related to that.
well, that's so interesting too, because that is like it's a mixture of writing but also illustration, and so now, now you're kind of
Yeah.
full circle, like back to exactly that. Especially with this book, a lot of illustrations. Who did the illustrations, by the way?
It's this woman I met named Paula Searing. When I was working on the proposal, I was like, I wanted to make sure that it had graphic elements in the proposal as opposed to like describing what they would be if it was a book. So I reached out to my friend Steve, who was running Clickhole at the time. And I just asked him if he knew any good illustrators or people who would be able to like do a lot of different kind of visual stuff, but also make sure that they really understand what the joke is. And they recommended Paula to me, and it was just like that was like the single best decision that I made in the entire thing. She was like perfect for it, super organized, could do anything. So then it sort of expanded my sort of writing because I realized like anything I can come up with, she can like execute. So she was like a major part of why the book came out the way it did.
Did a lot of your animation writing chops come in handy for a book like this? Because I am curious as to like how much do you add after you see the visuals? Do you kind of punch up and like add things based off of that? And how often is that even the case in animation writing? Like, is there a point after the animation comes in where there's any space to add something else? I suppose that's when they're doing the voice acting, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely are several stages of like the animated process where you can redo or just like sort of tweak things. Basically, like the farther along it gets in the process, the harder it gets to make changes. So
Yeah.
the changes have to be smaller, like if it's like, in the color stage. But in the early stage, which is called an animatic, which is like a black and white rendering of the episode where it's like a little, not all the frames are in it and it's like more rough, but you can sort of just see what it looks like and if it is working or not. And at that point, you can make larger changes. But, for a show like Family Guy where there is like a long lead time, I think it's about 15 months from the time an episode starts to like when it airs.
Wow.
So yeah, and that's one of the luxuries of animation. You really have a lot of chances to fix your mistakes.
Yeah. But that is very intense compared to basically every other style of writing where it's like, yeah, I'm having so much fun writing this. You have no idea where your life is going to be 15 months later when you're actually seeing it on TV.
You really like forget about it too. You see it and like, oh yeah, I remember that joke. Or, it's a distant memory.
When you were a kid, was it normal among your friend group to be one of the peers reading Calvin and Hobbes?
I don't know. I mean, I don't remember any. I mean, I'm sure lots of people were reading it like independently, but we weren't like getting together and like poring over the books like side by side. So I'm not sure what they were up to.
And what part of it do you think, or do you think a part of it kind of defines an element of your humor?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's like a playfulness in it that is really appealing. It's just like sort of it's fun and it's not like it has like serious moments, but it also just has a playfulness and like an imagination that's really attractive to a child.
I feel like you kind of answered this, but maybe not. But the second question to ask in the show is, what was the first official craft that you pursued? How long had comedy writing been something that you aspired to? And if that wasn't always the case, what was the first thing that you were like, not what your first job was, but what was the first craft that you're like, this is what I'm going to attempt doing with my life?
When I was in college, me and a friend that I met, my freshman year, we started doing like little cartoons for the newspaper. And, that was just really fun. I mean, I would write stuff and then I would slide it over to him and he would draw it. And it was very rudimentary and rough, but like it was fun. And so that I think was the first thing that whet my palate for like comedy writing. It was like a different style of it. And I remember in high school, like I found some old papers when I went back to my parents' house, and I had forgotten that I'd even done this, but I used to like have comic strips cut out of the newspaper, and then you would like erase the dialogue.
Oh, really?
That they had written, and then you just like write your own stuff in there. And
yeah.
So a lot of it was very crass. So I was just like, but it was like sort of looking back, I'm like, okay, I could start to trace how something.
Yeah. How could you even forget that? It feels so clear.
Yeah, I was like, oh right, I remember doing that. had a lot of time on my hands. I was just in the woods.
So that was always the specific craft, because you were a teacher for a while. That was just you living a very practical life, saying like this is what life is going to be.
Yeah, all that other stuff never occurred to me that could be like a career of any kind. It's just like, oh, this is fun stuff, but like now I've just graduated from college. It's time to like get serious and do the job thing.
Yeah.
Like put that stuff away, and I did for a while, and then all of a sudden it just sort of there was a moment when it sort of came back, and I was like, I should probably do this and try.
Well, what was that moment? What was happening with you emotionally at that time that was like, I need a shift here. I need to actually pursue this thing?
Well, I think being in China, like you start to see people that have been there a long time, like expats, and they're just sort of a little warped in a way. They're just like, there's like, oh, now you can't come back to America because like you're so, it's just like you're so off. And not that everybody who does that is, but like it definitely, I started to see what my future would look like. And I was like, I'm not sure if that's what I want to do. And so it started to make me like refocus on like what do I actually want to do? And it just sort of rekindled that aspect of it. And it sort of came back with a vengeance, actually. I was like, oh, that would be fun. And then all of a sudden, I'm like obsessed with it. And I was just like writing onion stuff constantly. Like every day after work, I would just be writing it for hours. And, so like by the time I had any opportunity to do anything, I had like 100 pages of like headlines. And I was just like pouring all my energy into it. And so I started to realize like this is what I should be doing.
How long were you there? I'm curious about what that distance from America, how that affects your humor, does that give you a sort of bird's eye view on things that helps with the comedy?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I was there for 5 years, 5 school years. And, I would come back to America over the holiday, like over the summer break and stuff. But it definitely like shifts your perspective. And I think that's sort of what comedy is all about, is like seeing things in a different way than like the usual way. And so I definitely think being plopped in a completely different culture and seeing things through different eyes and seeing things that you took for granted in America that are done completely differently in China, like it can't help but sharpen that sort of perspective and perception of it.
The people in your life, how did they feel when you made that decision?
It was weird. Like it would be almost a Rorschach test of the other person. It'd be like, where my mom was like, yeah, that sounds great. You should just do that. If that's what you want to do, go for it. She also encouraged me to go to China if I wanted to, or, she's just like, do what you want.
Nice.
And my dad's like a little more cautious. He's just like, okay, I don't know. All right, sure. He's not like actively saying not to do it, but like,
yeah.
He's the kind of guy where like he gets very panicked about stuff, which I guess ties into the fear thing.
Yeah.
Where like when I went to China, he was like, I don't know. I saw a story of like a train crash there once. And I was like, okay, it's a pretty big country. And just because a bad thing happened there once, it's like off the list. I'm not sure if that's the way to perceive it.
Were there little versions of that conversation throughout your life?
I don't know. I think that, as they get older, I think the fear tends to take hold more than like...
the more Law and Order they start watching, the more...
Right. Yeah, it's just like... And I also have to think that has to do with like the cable news, the rise of that. It's just like we're just like more aware of problems than we used to be.
It's funny you describing your childhood. I'm imagining Craig of the Creek. Have you watched that show, that cartoon?
No.
It's this great cartoon, a little black kid who hangs out in the wilderness a lot. And I feel like that's so different from my childhood. I grew up in South Central LA, and I was a very indoors kid because I wasn't allowed to go around the block. There is a lot of creative freedom, it seems like, you get by being able to explore like that.
Yeah, it's just nobody's really watching. They're just like, just come back later. And also, like social media wasn't as big of a thing. So you're just doing, you're just bored and you're just trying to have fun. And, I have friends over and we just making up games and stuff. I mean, just games that like kids should not be doing, just like super violent and just like somebody's going to get hurt. We used to play this game where we had this motion detector on the driveway, and like so you'd walk down the driveway, but if you walk slowly enough, then the motion detector won't go off. So then it would be a game where like one person would have to walk from one end of the driveway to the other side, and everybody had like rocks and sticks, and they were all like as soon as the light goes on, then we get to throw stuff at you and just try to like pelt you with everything we can find. So it was so tense because you'd be walking so slowly. But then the second the light goes on, you have to like bolt because everybody's tossing shit at you. I'm like, Why are they letting us do this? Like, this is, they're just throwing rocks at each other. Like, that's not a good thing to be doing. But, just like a million versions of that kind of stuff. So it's just, and my friends were very creative, and it was just like a fun kind of a thing.
I imagine, so in that moment where you make that shift, you have a reserve of savings, and then you start to practically pursue the dream of writing comedy for television. How did that work for you? Like, what were the scary moments in there? Speaking of fears,
Yeah. Well, I mean, with the Onion thing, like the craziest thing happened, which was that I got in touch with one of the editors there while I was still in China. Because I was writing all these headlines and putting them on Facebook, as I mentioned, and he had this post one day. I don't know why he wanted this, but he had a post where he asked for everybody in his timeline to send a picture of you with a thumb, like giving a thumbs up. So I was like, all right, I could do that. And so what I did was I did this elaborate Photoshop where I have 1,000 arms and I'm just giving all these thumbs up. I'm like, maybe he'll notice this. I don't know. And he actually did. He hit me up a few days later and he's like, oh, I noticed this picture. And then that took me to your page and I saw some of your headlines and I was like, oh, if you'd be interested in doing a tryout for a headline contributor spot when you get back to America, just hit me up when you get to New York. And so it literally worked exactly like I was hoping it would. I was like, that is the best case scenario of how that would have played out. So that only took me into overdrive of writing headlines. Now I'm I actually have a legitimate shot at this. That happened around April.
Yeah.
I still had about 3 more months. So then it's I'm upshifting to insane levels of writing. And so then when I got back to the States, I was a few weeks in and I went to the office where the Onion was. And, it was right all of a sudden, 3 weeks in, I'm in the nerve center of this whole thing. You're seeing the headlines on the whiteboards. You're like, this is insane, and so they sort of broke it down for me how to do the tryout, which was that you pitch headlines for 4 weeks, once a week for 4 weeks. And, if you got any jokes in or if they liked what you were doing, then they would let you kind of stick around. You'd be at the bottom rung where you're just tossing headlines into the creative furnace over there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, before all this happened, I was hoping that maybe I could get an internship and just everything just sort of locked into place and just felt okay, it gave me a lot of confidence that I'm not completely insane, that maybe this is a goal that could actually happen,
How do you feel about some of the shifts in how comedy is produced? Because I moved to Chicago in 2012, and that was a time where on every 5 blocks or so, there was a free physical Onion paper. And I loved picking those up and I loved reading them on the bus. And I feel like a downside of the internet age is that tangible element of the comedy isn't there anymore. Does that frustrate you at all?
Yeah, it does actually. I really, my favorite format is just a book or paper or things that are touched. I mean, maybe it's just because I'm on my computer all the time for work that when I'm not doing it, I don't want to do more of it. It's just a different thing on the screen.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I was heartbroken when the Onion ended the print edition because it was so much more satisfying to get it in. You're flipping through it and you pick it up. And it's just a completely different element. On a side note, though, I have heard that, because the Onion was just bought by some new people, and it sounds like they have some thoughts about bringing some version of the print edition back.
That's incredible, yeah.
I don't think it's going to be a weekly thing anymore, but maybe some sort of special editions or something, which I got very excited about. It's that's great.
Don't scroll away. You Are the Genre. We'll be right back after the break. You Are the Genre is an independently produced podcast, and as I mentioned before, there are a few ways that you can support it. You can subscribe and give it a nice comment wherever you're listening to it right now. There's also a newsletter component to the show. You can find a link to it in the show notes where you can subscribe for free or upgrade to a paid subscription, which gives you advanced episodes plus other goodies. This break is typically a way for me to promote something that I've simply been enjoying or something that I experienced that was really fun. One of them truly is the book that Evan Waite wrote, Life Wants You Dead. It's a really, really, really fun read and a great gift for someone who's particularly fearful in your life. Another book that I've been reading is Voice Lessons. I just cracked this open. It's Rob Paulson, who's voiced characters on the Animaniacs and the Ninja Turtles, and it's a story about his life. It's an autobiography, all about the ups and downs of navigating a career in Hollywood and facing a true fear for him, the concept of losing his voice. So there you go. Those are 2 book recommendations and 1 newsletter recommendation. If you want to subscribe to that newsletter, get all of the information you need at youarethegenre.com. Now, back to the episode. Where were we? Yeah, something about you describing that process of like so many levels too, of like pitching ideas. That brought my own fear, which I'm sure connects to a fear of yours, of what everyone's talking about with artificial intelligence, of like, the ideation mechanism, the human part of that could potentially get replaced. And I talk to people sometimes, they're like, yeah, I don't mind asking ChatGPT for some recommendations on that. But knowing that used to be, a human being's job, to be in that sort of incubator.
Yeah, it's tough because it's just, I think humans have this sort of warring instinct between like the right thing to do versus like the easy and comfortable and convenient thing to do.
Yeah.
I think you see that completely like with everybody's conflicted relationship with Amazon.
Yeah.
It's like, I feel terrible about using it, yet I use it like several times a week. I'm actively like hurting the world by doing this, but like they have the book for half as much and I could have it in like 3 hours.
Yeah. Or it'll be like, I will never buy something from Amazon, but I'm going to pitch a show there.
Right.
That's
Yeah. I've tried to go on the reservation with the Amazon thing. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go out there and I'm just going to go buy this product at the store. And then I go and they don't have it. And they're like, we can order it and it's twice as much and it'll be here in 2 weeks. I'm just like, all right. So yeah, it's just one of those things, but I haven't used ChatGPT. I'm not really itching to do that, but if you have to write like cover letters or something, I guess I can understand the appeal of using something like that. But as for creative stuff, that seems bad. Seems very bad.
Well, I will say that you're one of the rare few people who has like a clear through line in your life. I don't know if you're just really good at not revealing the complex inner your complex inner world, but it is amazing to hear that like early on you were essentially creating your own writer's room. You were punching things up, maybe making things in Calvin and Hobbes a little more crass than they should have been. But I would actually love to see those.
You got to dig those back up when I go back to my mom's house.
But often in the show, there are people who have like a conflict between that first craft in their careers and taking that leap of faith and what they do now. But for you, it's all right there. So further making it complicated that you write a book called Life Once You Dead. I mean,
yeah. I mean, this book, really is one of those things where when I look back, I'm like, every single like step that happened sort of resulted in this thing. Like I can see all the different elements. Like when I started, I was like over at The Onion and then like Mad Magazine and The President's Show where it was like satire was there. And it's just like every one of those is like sort of represented in the book. And so that's why it was just so fun to do. It was really like the most fun project I've ever done. I mean, it was just like a joy. I was having so much fun. And, and I think it's like when you can scale it down, like when you think, oh, I have to write a book, like that's very paralyzing kind of thought.
Yeah.
When you're just like, oh, I just have to write like one funny page today. Then all of a sudden you're scaling it down and then you do that every day for a month. And then all of a sudden you have a chapter. It's just like sort of grows. And it takes a little bit of the fear of having to do something so big out of it a little bit.
Yeah. Do you envision any sequels in the work? Are there other things that want us dead?
I don't know. I mean, I have been thinking about some things. I have been thinking about if you were to take this sort of narrator character, putting him in different scenarios, talking about different aspects of life, what that might look like.
Yeah.
But there's a push and pull of that too, because I feel like generally sequels are never as good as the originals. I remember there was a Daily Show put out a book called America, the book, back in like the mid 2000s. And it was, I think, like one of the best humor books of all time. It's just like everything is perfect. Like the illustrations, the concept, it's just like a perfect piece of satire. And then they, because the book is so successful, they put out this second book called Earth, which I don't think the conceit was quite as strong. I think it came about because the first one was successful. They wanted another one.
Yeah.
And it was, the idea for that was that like aliens come down from Earth or aliens come down from space. And this is like a guide to understanding what human human existence is.
Yeah.
Which is a good idea, but the America as a textbook to me is a better idea.
Yeah.
And the other one, it was packed with amazing jokes and everything, but it's just not quite as memorable. So that's something I'm struggling with, where I'm just like, am I setting myself up for something that feels lesser to me? I don't know. So it's hard to follow something up when it came out exactly the way you want. You feel great about it, and then you're like, okay, how do I do that again? I don't know.
Well, I'm interested in, you described the narrator of this book as if it's not you. So do you feel like you kind of became a character in the writing process?
Yeah. I mean, it definitely became that pretty quickly. I was like, oh, I can do this, and then it's sort of not me, but also it has elements of me in it, where it's it gives you the freedom to step back and be like, oh, I would never say or think that. That's not me. Then also it's sort of me too,
Yeah.
And that's one reason that I decided not to put a photograph of myself in the book, because I felt like conceptually that bumps a little bit, because it's this is a character, but then if it's a picture of me, then what does that mean in terms of
Yeah.
of it?
And then you want to give people context clues to be like, oh, I'm pretty sure that a black guy wrote this.
Right. And then it's okay, so, and also that's because I thought about that, where it's the universality of it is a little shifted, because the fears you have as a black person are very specific, and also those aren't fears that seem unreasonable either.
Yeah.
It's to me that bumps it, because this is about somebody who's fearing things that they shouldn't be fearing, that are heightened. But the fears of walking through the world as a black person in 2024 is those are legitimate fears, and that's not what I'm talking about.
But I love that what you're describing is using this as a way to access that universality. Is that the right way? Universality. This allows you to work in a space that is taken for granted when a white person writes anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's still black. It's still you. But by kind of taking away that all the assumptions that you could take from seeing a picture of you in the back of the book,
Mm-hmm.
it opens things up to. I don't want it to be like people are putting on your avatar blue skin, but it opens people up to to our reality in a way that's not you need to sit down and understand this. It's more this is an experience of what it's like in this level of being in the world. Yeah.
I mean, I did there was a period where I was sort of conceiving of a chapter that was based on race, that was a consideration, but what I realized, it was just completely bumping with the rest of it. It just didn't work, and it made it really heavy, first of all. And I sort of didn't want it to be heavy, but also it definitely made it sort of specific and exclusionary to everybody else's sort of experience. And also it just felt like, oh no, these are serious things that you should be afraid of, and that's not, I mean, that's just sort of not what this is. And I didn't understand that wasn't what it was until I actually tried to write it. And I was just this doesn't feel like it's jiving with the rest of this. And the editors were also, they agreed. They're yeah, this, I don't know, this doesn't feel consistent with what the rest of the book is.
I'm fascinated by you saying that part of this is your voice, part of it is a character, while also understanding that it's still you. And you've written for so many different shows, and a part of writing for television is that you have to really learn someone else's voice. Either it's the late night host or the showrunner, creator. And I had a moment where I was writing for The Tonight Show. I was writing for Jimmy Fallon during the pandemic and during the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd.
Yeah.
And at that
it's right
time,
in Jimmy's wheelhouse.
And at that time, that show, a lot of writers go in and out. I happened to be in that sweet spot where I happened to be the only black writer at the time. And there were so many complexities of that, of being the only black person in the Zoom room. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
everybody turns to you. All right, so what are we doing?
And that was the second of 3 TV shows that I wrote for in a row. And so not having a break between 3 shows, when I got out of that, not saying I escaped or anything, but when going through those 3 jobs, I realized, I had lost access to a certain element of my voice. And I wonder if that's something that you've had throughout your career. Do you mind? Do you enjoy figuring out someone else's voice? And was writing this access to something that you hadn't had in a while?
Well, I would say no. I mean, first of all, I do like switching and just being into whatever I like the challenge of trying to figure out like what's the overlap of what I can do versus like what the voice is. It's sort of like a concentric circle where it's like my voice is one of the circles and the voice of the show is the other one. And I like the challenge of trying to find that middle ground. Um, but also, I've always sort of had a career where I've been able to do my own stuff too. Where I'm like, okay, I have my job, and then I have like my outside projects. Like doing like New Yorker stuff or whatever. It's just like these little things that I get to do that can showcase like me without having to represent a larger organization. So I feel like if I wasn't doing that and I was only doing the show that I was on or the project that I was on, then I might maybe feel that more. But also, I don't know, I just sort of like being in the background. I mean, I think that's why I'm a writer and not a performer. Like, I sort of enjoy that element of it. Like, for instance, at The Onion, like, we didn't have any bylines on any of the pieces. So I found a lot of freedom in that because it's like I can write whatever I think is the funniest, and I don't feel like I have to explain it to my grandmother. Like, what am I doing?
There is a
Yeah,
weird freedom to that too, like almost like a fight club for words. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Like,
It allows you to like take more bigger swings. I felt like I really struggled with that with the book, actually, knowing that like I can't do that anymore. This is like everybody knows exactly what this is. And I remember my grandmother saying, "Oh, I can't wait to get your book," and just thinking about the page where it's like smearing all the different bodily fluids on the page.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
I'm just thinking of her like looking at that and being really disturbed by it.
Well, it seems like you're using these comedy mediums as this sort of this mystery box that you can go into, where it's like, yeah, this is part of me, but you really do seem to enjoy having that distance from yourself in a way. And so, when you were coming up as a kid, were you writing a lot? Was this a part of how you expressed yourself?
No, not really. I mean, I was reading a lot. I wasn't really writing a lot, but I did read a lot. Like because I was just again, I was in the woods and I didn't have anything else to do. And my mom was a big reader. She would read the worst books, though. I have to say,
Like what? Yeah.
she just would read all the Harlequin romance books
Uh-huh.
that it cost like 50 cents. Like they're just trash romance novels where it's just like the cover with the guy with the rips open shirt and the
Yeah.
woman who's like splayed against his chest. She read so many of those. It's just she would just read one and then read another and then read
Yeah.
another, and they're really horribly written. But but I did see her reading all the time, and so I was doing that too. So I feel like I was just like absorbing a lot of other people's writing.
What kind of stuff were you reading?
Well, I really liked Stephen King a lot.
Oh.
I sort of got into him in middle school, and I don't know. I mean, I read a lot of stuff. Lord of the Rings was a good one. Just whatever I could get my hands on. I would go to book sales all the time. I mean, I still do that. Like almost every week, I'll just go to like libraries have these book sales out in LA where they're just like basically giving all these books away. It's like 50 cents or something, and it's still like the nerdiest thing ever. I really feel like when I'm in it and I see the other people, I go, wow, I guess this is what I'm all about. It's just like a lot of people look like they haven't left their house since the last book sale, just kind of musty and
Yeah.
moth-ridden sweaters and stuff. So,
Well,
all right.
well, I'm having this beautiful vision of you. Like, it seems like do you have a quiet family? Your parents and you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So quiet, sitting in the living room. Mom's reading this crazy romance novel. You're reading it. I don't know what your dad's reading,
He
but
doesn't really like reading all that much. He's just out doing stuff while we're just like reading about
he's
it.
mowing the lawn while
Yeah.
while you and your mom are silently in these inner worlds. But it feels like, do you identify as an introvert, having that moniker?
Yeah, I would say that's definitely would describe me. I mean, I definitely like with the comedy writing thing. I really had to make an effort to change that because I knew I had to like meet a lot of people because I literally when I got to New York I only knew one guy. Like he was the guy who invited me into the Onion. I was like, if something went wrong or if he just stopped emailing me or something, I'd be completely screwed here.
Yeah.
So when I got to New York, I really started making an effort to build a network. And me and this other guy. There was a period where Mad Magazine, I started writing with them, and then they had asked me if I knew any other writers who could sort of help contribute because they wanted to freshen up their contributor base. So I like invited several people. We had this meeting in their office in Manhattan. And unbeknownst to me, there was like this other guy named Frank Santopadre who they also invited to do the same. So all of a sudden we were in this room with all these interesting people from all over the comedy spectrum in New York. It'd be like a Tonight Show guy, then a Colbert guy, a New Yorker, Onion. And what I found was the conversation was so vibrant and interesting because all these people were in their own separate little spaces and they didn't really get the chance to mix all that much. So me and Frank afterwards, we got to talk and we were like, maybe we should like do something where we could engineer this type of energy again. And so we started doing these writers' dinners every month.
Oh, nice.
It would be me and Frank and then like 4 other writers. So it'd be like just 6 people at a table. We just like pluck interesting people. And then it always was like so fun and everybody always like loved it. They were like, we all would love to do this, but like nobody actually ever put this together.
Yeah.
So we did that for probably about 6 months or so. And then we were like, why don't we do like a party? We could blow this out into a bigger thing. Like instead of 6 people, it could be like 60 people.
Yeah.
And so we started like renting different spaces in New York and we would do that. And like one of them we rented was the Rare Book Room at the top of the Strand. There's like a book room like at the very top level of the Strand that's kind of private. So we'd rent that and we're like, we'll just try to find like an interesting space and then invite people into this. And we'd be like, don't bring your spouse or anything. Like, we want every single person in this room to be like on that level so that everybody you talk to is like some interesting conversation. And so we did that probably like 4 or 5 times. Like every 6 months we would do it. And all of a sudden I realized that like my network was exponentially expanding. And all of a sudden I sort of knew what was going on. I knew when shows were hiring. And then, when I heard of like an interesting opportunity that wasn't right for me, I could kick it over to somebody else. And then, then it would always inevitably come back to me in some other way later. It just became this web of sort of goodwill. And that's sort of the strategy I've always tried to approach the comedy writing thing with.
Nice. Well, I feel like we could potentially land this plane by talking about what it's like. You described an element of it, but one of my favorite things, I am a bit of an introvert as well. And it feels like introverts, seem simple on the outside. So everything seems simple on the outside, but there is a very complex inner world going on in there. Right. And
unrelenting too.
Unrelenting. And knowing how much you were reading and stuff, there is probably an obsession with the orchestration of words and putting them in the right place. And like, I'm sure like even in writing this book, you were constantly revising. Like
they had to take me off of it eventually. They were like, you can't edit this anymore. Like it's going to the printer now. Like stop. I was like, put this comma on page 56.
Yeah. And all those things are so important. And it is weird. Like words have become, I've noticed so many connections between words, math, and music. They're all kind of the same thing. Oh, yeah. And there's a strange alchemy there that you're writing words, like sometimes you're pitching in a room with other human beings, sometimes you're writing again. And that process of it going from the page to being spoken out loud from an actor, and then doing rewrites and like learning the social elements of the actor and implementing that into the script and all that kind of stuff is fascinating. But when you were navigating your career and you are a quiet kind of person, were you dealing with that in the room? Were there some fears to conquer in that regard?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm still not like the greatest pitcher in the world when I'm pitching stuff. It's sort of like my strategy was always like just write a lot and tighten it and make it like bulletproof so that even if you just read it, like people can see the comedy angles of it and it's really sharp and tight.
Yeah.
Because, my first real TV job was at The President's Show, which was a show back in 2017. And it was a lot of UCB type of people there because Anthony Atamanuik, who created the show, he was a big UCB guy. So like pretty much everybody there were people who were great writers and also great performers. And so they were like selling the hell out of their material and they were like great at it. And I just wasn't. And I'm still not that great at it. And so what I would do is just like tighten it up and make it like razor sharp when I would bring it so that I felt like people can see what I'm bringing to it, even if like the performance side of it isn't great.
Yeah. I always had a specific fear of, I don't know, I feel like being a Black writer, people assume that you're good at act outs in the room. And I was right. Like, I'm gonna let so many people down by not being able.
Right. Respecting the where's that Def Jam energy?
Yeah.
I'm not feeling it. So, yeah, I felt that too. Just like, that's not what you're going to get from me. But
Yeah.
You know, I remember because every once in a while, like very rarely do I have to do, you know, for the table reads for Family Guy, like some of the actors, sometimes the actors can get there and sometimes they can't. So sometimes other people have to fill in. And I remember that I've had to fill in a couple of times. I'm just like sweating bullets. I'm like, this is not what I'm good at. Like I had to do Cleveland. I had to do Cleveland one time. And
yeah.
I remember one time I had to do some rap song or something. I'm just like, I don't want to do this, man. There's like 100 people on the Zoom, and I'm like, I feel like a dick. It was like the Sir Mix-a-Lot thing. It was like a parody, and I wrote it. So I'm like, why the fuck did I write this? Now I got to do it.
Yeah.
They kind of cut me some slack too, because like it was originally like a full page rap. It was like long. It would have been like a minute and a half. And then they were like, you don't have to do the whole thing. Just do like that one little snippet.
Yeah, and you kind of have to become a parasite for the actual person in the room who is good at act out. So I'm always kind of whispering something to them, like teeing them up, you know? That's always great when you find that that friend like that. Yeah.
I remember that somebody put me up for a job one time. It was like a rewrite job. And I met with the person who was, you know, hiring, and later their theory was like they hired somebody else because the other person was like upbeat, and they were like you know, putting on a dog and pony show. And they were like, this guy is like not doing that. What's his problem? I'm just like, all right,
yeah.
Where I felt like I could write a lot of good stuff for you, but like if that's what the metric is, then you know, maybe the other person was the right choice. So.
Well, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining the show. And this is one of the funniest books that I've ever read. It is incredible. Yeah.
I really appreciate that. It's been a long time coming. It's like a lot of stuff has like led to it. So I'm really happy it's out in the world. And thanks so much for talking with me about it. Appreciate that.
Huge thanks to Evan Waite for joining the show. Pick up his book, Life Once You Dead, and get more information about him at evanwaite.com. That's Evan, WAITE.com. Freddie Nunez created and sings the You Are the Genre theme song, and Adam Smith produced it. Next episode, comedian Yadoye Travis joins me on the show. But if you become a paid subscriber to my newsletter, you can listen to it a week ahead of the normies. This is Tim Barnes signing off with your weekly reminder that you are the genre.
First I got your voicemail, then I got you. We can meet in person or maybe on Zoom. So tell me what's your genre, tell me what do you do? I'd like to know the things that specifically make